Hello again, and we're doing part two of Charlie Chaplin. And last time we had gotten to where Charlie leaves Keystone, and we're going to start off today with how Michael got into Charlie Chaplin, was introduced to Charlie Chaplin. So go ahead, Michael.
Okay, Brendan. It's interesting that Charlie Chaplin, everybody knew what he looked like. Everybody, when I was growing up, he was a familiar figure, and yet you couldn't see his films. I keep trying to wonder, how did that happen? That it was Charlie Chaplin was kind of familiar, but occasionally you'd see they'd run a Keystone comedy or one of the other comedies on TV as part of something else, as part of a kid's show or something like that. Usually the prints weren't very good, although I didn't know that. And the music was just tacked on, although I didn't know that, of course. I'm just watching. And yet it was a current image, a little bit like Marilyn Monroe today. She's been dead for 60 years, but she's still a current image. And it's something like that. So I was 18, about to be 19. It was September 1964. And I was looking for a job in Manhattan. My mother and I had set up an apartment in the Bronx, and I'd left college. And we were going to get my sister out of a St. Joseph's Children's Home in Peekskill, where she'd been for almost half her life. She was only about 10, 11 years old. Maybe 12. And, just a working stiff. So I was looking for a job. And I would look for a job in the morning to early afternoon. And movies were very, very cheap to go to. $1 was a lot for a ticket. And daytime matinee was like 50 cents, 75 cents. And Cokes and popcorn was still a dime, 15 cents kind of thing. And I'd go to a film, and then I'd take subway back to the Bronx and look again the next day. That's went on for 2-3 weeks before I found a steady job. And so I saw this marquee. It said Charlie Chaplin in Limelight. I had no idea. I went in, and this was a film, it turns out, that he made after he left the U.S.A. And he made it in 1952. It was issued in 1952. And he plays an old clown who had been a star and now was a broken down drunk, and who helps a suicidal ballerina played by Claire Bloom come back to life, really. And soon, so he comes back to life. And there's a wonderful scene in it where Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton do a bit together on stage. And critics generally don't like this film.
Really?
I would find out much later. Huh. They generally don't like this film. They think it's kind of pretentious. But I loved it.
Yeah, I like that movie a lot.
And Chaplin, who wrote it and directed it and wrote the music for it, the music won an Academy Award. Chaplin says some wonderful things in it. My favorite being the ballerina Claire Bloom is in bed after she's tried to gas herself, and Chaplin's taking care of her. His stage name is Calvero. Calvero's taking care of her, and she says, "There's a meaning." And he says, "What do you want a meaning for? Life is a desire, not a meaning." And I went, "Oh, wow." That really made sense to me. And the film moved me very much. We won't spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but...
Did he write the movie?
Oh, yeah. He wrote it. He wrote it. He wrote the music for it. He wrote the music for all his films after about 1922. Never had a music lesson. Played cello and violin with his left hand. He was left-handed. Yeah, he wrote the script. So that was my introduction, and yet it made me want to read about Chaplin. I found Robert Payne's book on Chaplin, originally titled The Great God Pan, and beautiful writing. I don't know as I agree with Payne about a lot of things now, but beautiful writing. And it's Payne. Book that's not that easy to get anymore. And then in 1972, the winter of 1972, I was 26 years old, and I was working in an office in Boston. And Chaplin, who owned all his best films, the films he did for First National, and then all the films he did for his own studio. So all the great feature films, The Kid, The Gold Rush, The Circus, City Lights, Modern Times, Great Dictator, Monsieur Verdoux, The King in New York, he owned them all. And he reissued them in select cities with pristine prints, excellent music, excellent sound. And he was writing the music to all his pictures from the 1920s on, and the scenarios. He acted, directed, wrote the music, wrote the script, did it more so than any other person. The only other person you can really compare with him in that sense is Orson Welles. In the sense of this complete involvement in all sides of the picture. And Buster Keaton for the 2 or 3 films he really had freedom on. In any case, they're going to be reissued. There's a little theater in Boston, and one was going to play per week for the rest of the winter. And I was very excited about this. And they played in sequence. Now, when Chaplin left Keystone, he went to show you where these films are in the progress of Chaplin's career. When he left Keystone, he went to a film company in Chicago called U.S.A. And he made 14 films in a year. And it's only in the 6th film, and then they vary in quality. They sold very well. They were funny, as funny was perceived at the time. But in the 6th film, called The Tramp, that's where he finally starts getting a hold of the character he wants Charlie to be. Because up until this point, from the beginning of 1914 into the middle of 1916, he's made a lot of films. 35 Keystone films, and 5 of the films for S&A. The films for S&A are all 2-reelers. A lot of the Keystone films are 1-reelers. And he has experimented with the figure I call the Tramp. People call him Charlie. People call him, Chaplin himself would call him the little fellow. He's been experimenting with all different kinds of Charlies within the basic costume he discovered kind of by chance in his very first film, or second film, but very first film was Charlie, Mabel's Strange Predicament, Keystone, directed by Mabel Norman. And he's been experimenting. What does this character do? He feels, all his life, he said, the little fellow is a mystery to me. I never quite know what he's up to. I can't really think about him until I'm in his costume. And he always surprises me. And it's when you think about the persona of the Tramp, Charlie, the little fellow, always on the move. He's always in a different situation. And, what exactly is he doing there? Whereas with Buster Keaton, who's great, you don't want to put down Buster Keaton at all. But Keaton, as a character, he had that persona, and he is in a situation playing through that persona a person trying to be normal, trying to do things kind of normally, and it never works out. And Harold Lloyd, who made more money with his comedies than anybody, than Chaplin or Keaton in the 20s, he had this stock character which looked like the image that the 1920s had of a college boy.
Right.
The glasses, the hat, and so he was a typical American college boy trying to make good, as they used to say. And Roscoe Arbuckle had, as fatty, was 300 pounds. And yet he had the acrobatic ability of Chaplin. I mean, he was 300 pounds, but he had the delicacy. I mean, some of his stunts are just amazing. And he had ambidextrous, is that a word for being able to use both hands with equal skill? So he could juggle knives, and he could do all kinds of things with incredible dexterity, both hands. He was said to be the best pie thrower at Keystone. He could practically throw a pie around a corner. Is the legend. And but who is this Charlie? And in the sixth film at S&A, Chaplin, it's called The Tramp. It begins with Charlie on the road. He gets into all kinds of fixes and has his heart broken. And at the end of it, for the first time, The Tramp, 1916, it ends with Charlie walking lonely down the road.
Yeah.
Lonely, but not defeated. And that becomes the mark of Chaplin. He doesn't walk lonely down the road in every film, but he is this character who shows up, who is searching somehow, some way. And he goes, Chaplin, after making 14 films for S&A of very varying qualities, he signs with a company called Mutual in 1916-17. And there he, with films like The Rink and Easy Street and The Immigrant, The Pawn Shop, he really refines the Charlie character. The Charlie character is a dreamer. The Charlie character wants terribly to be useful and fit in a sense, but knows he doesn't. Knows that this isn't a world he really fits in. And I believe that was part of Chaplin's great appeal as time went on. Because very few of us believe that this is a world we really fit in. And Charlie exemplified that. He shows up, and what's he going to do? And really, that's the existential situation we're all in. We didn't create this world. We show up, what are we going to do? And so you have a film like The Rink, in which it's all on roller skates, and you suddenly see Chaplin as a phenomenal roller skater. And a film like The Pawn Shop, which is really delicate comedy. Easy Street, where he somehow is a cop, the most unlikely cop possible, but deal with what you see. I mean, there's drug addiction comedy, there's bully comedy, and one of the things I noticed then in Chaplin is when he's got full command, he had full command of all these productions. The people he picks, especially in the Mutual era and from then on, to play with, have realistic working class mostly faces. It's Charlie who looks like he's come from somewhere else, but the rest of the people are very realistic. And the grunge is realistic. And then you get to the film that is the first real masterpiece of the features and holds up completely, The Kid. Now, The Kid is, when was The Kid done? 1921. It's a feature film. And I wrote some notes. I want to read them. That early in 1972, Charles Chaplin released his major features in select cities. He's played for a week. This was the first time since their original release that these pictures screened with pristine prints and soundtracks. The Kid was virtually impossible to see, even in New York City. You have to wait for the Museum of Modern Art to show its print maybe once a year. And all the films, they were hard to see. And here it was, the first time their original release, since their original release. And so I was at that theater, and I remember where that theater was. It was kind of out of the way, which was kind of a pain because in Boston, the trolleys stopped running at about 11 o'clock. Wherever you are after 11 o'clock, you're walking home.
Yeah.
And it's winter, but I would stay. I'd see them twice through, which you could still do then without paying another ticket. And what really stands out, seeing these major features as I did then 1 week after the other, and I saw all of them at least twice, is that the tramp Charlie exists in encounters. He exists for encounters. He's not simply walking down a road alone. He's walking always towards something. With the other great clowns, with Buster Keaton, with Mabel Normand, Harold Lloyd, Lauren Hardy, the Marx Brothers, W.C. Fields, life happens to them and they do what they do. And film critics generally prefer Keaton's formalism and his precision. He's easier to write about. Laurel and Hardy are usually taken for granted, those we talked about last week. They're funnier than anybody. Mabel Normand remains shamefully ignored because she's a woman. Harold Lloyd is respected but not loved. The Marx Brothers and W.C. Fields are wonderful, but again, they find themselves within situations and proceed to act out their natures, their comedic souls, in terms of those situations. Chaplin's Charlie is existentially farther out there. He's like us, as I said, in that he doesn't feel of this place. It's like, how do I end up here? What am I supposed to do here? What is this world we found ourselves into? He's unattached to anything, and yet he's always in search of a counterpart. One of the things that distinguishes his features is that Chaplin finds somebody. And the Kid, Jackie Coogan, is Charlie's perfect accomplice. And it's as though Charlie can complete himself as the Kid's caretaker. And you see him doing something that seems impossible for this little vagabond. He sets up a household. And what does he teach the Kid? He teaches him how to get by with, not honestly exactly, but, no major crimes. And they get by. They fix windows that they've broken. They do that kind of thing. And it builds to the place where is coming to take the boy away from Charlie. And the panic of the boy, Jackie Coogan was an amazing performance, and the panic of Charlie at losing each other isn't funny. It is, no other comedy I can think of has anything like the two of those two performers so terrified at losing each other. And yet this is comedy. The authorities take the boy. Chaplin does this incredible run over the rooftop, jumps in the boys in the truck, the open truck that they're taking the boy away, and you see the two of them clinging to each other in close-up, really terrified. And the film builds to that place and goes away from that place. And it's a strange ending because Charlie reunites the lost boy with his family at the end. But what's he going to do? Have visiting rights? I mean, it's I found it anyway, not a satisfactory ending in the sense of me, an emotional person in the theater. Do I really want to see this boy reunited with this normal stuck-up family?
Yeah.
He's been happy with Charlie. And you accept it as a convention. And at the same time, it's not a realistic film. We know Charlie can't keep the kid. So with this film, Chaplin goes into the area that he's most famous for, that he's known for. He engages our emotions in really a kind of spooky way. Moment of silence. Because he can't keep the kid and it's going to end. What did we just see? We saw kind of a dream that for some people would be kind of nightmarish. And yet it's very, very sweet and funny and engaging. And yet, where are you really with this? Where you get the sense of mystery that Chaplin felt himself toward the character. I think with the kid, he transmits that sense of mystery to the audience.
And this, I would think that a lot of his own childhood experiences went into that, and that sense of precarity, and not being sure of anything, not being sure of connections, not being sure of material needs. I'm sure that he tried to get that through in that picture, and that's part of the sense of mystery in it. And I think overall with Chaplin, what you get in most of those films, and myself having put myself in this kind of situation because I like being in that, or I did when I was young, of going into a totally new situation or a new city where you don't know anyone with very little money, and purely what your aura draws to you is what fate has in store for you is what's going to occur, and just laying your head on fate, I think is something that he's trying to get across in his films, and that brings in that moral part of the tramp, because even though he does all these little scammy kind of nickel and dime things to get by, there's always this undercurrent of strong morality to the tramp,
yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yes, I agree. And so the next thing he does, the next film Chaplin directs, is the Gold Rush. Now, by this time, and by the time of the kid, Chaplin has his own studio. He finances his own pictures. He has no boss. He built a studio on La Brea, with several acres on La Brea below Hollywood Boulevard. Some of the buildings are still there. And he would come to work. He had a permanent crew of everybody you needed to make a film. He had a stable of actors. His leading lady for several years in those days was Edna Proviance. She was in The Immigrant. She was in that era of his films. And as he said years later, because he would come to work, he'd get he'd be building sets, and he said years later, he said, they'd ask me, where do you want this wall? And I'd say, oh, on the left. Why? I don't know. He said, you build yourself a labyrinth and find a way out. And so his films, he meditated on the set, in a sense. Sometimes he'd take many, many takes of one thing, one scene. And they'd be virtually identical, but he'd be going through it and going through it and going through it. He had to do it that way. A great thing he put in his autobiography that happened in this period, early in this period. The great dancer, kind of a madman, Nijinsky, loved Chaplin's films, Russian dancer Nijinsky. And he was in America, he was in Hollywood, and he wanted to see Chaplin direct. And Chaplin was very honored. Nijinsky was considered a genius. People who witnessed Nijinsky say that it wasn't that he could leap higher than any dancer, it's that he seemed to stay up longer. His leaps seemed to take a longer time than other dancers. Like he could hover. A bunch of people commented on that. It was a common thing people saw. He had a kind of hypnotic power over the audience through his dancing. Someone like Isadora Duncan did around the same time. In any case, by this time, Nijinsky was quite insane and very, very depressed. And Chaplin just couldn't work with the guy. I mean, with the guy staring at him like that, it wasn't coming out as comedy. And Nijinsky was having a great time in his depression. And he wanted to come again the next day. And Chaplin told his crew, okay, we are performing for Nijinsky. No film in the camera. And so the next day, Nijinsky came with his little entourage, and Chaplin performed for Nijinsky. Nijinsky thought a film was being shot, but there was no film in the camera. That made Chaplin free enough to do whatever pleased Nijinsky as he was shooting on his set. That's maybe my favorite Chaplin story. But in any case, he had a long time to prepare The Kid. Then he had a longer time to prepare The Gold Rush. That was his next film. The Kid was in 1921. The Gold Rush was in 1925. And it started off when he read a book about the Donner Party, who got very misguided. They hired the wrong guide to get them over Donner Pass. You come up from the desert in Northern California, and you got to get over the mountains if you're getting into California. There's the Donner Pass, and I've experienced snow in the Donner Pass in May. Winter lasts forever up there, and the Donner wagon train got caught in that snow and trapped. They didn't know way in, didn't know way out, and they fascinating and kind of disgusting documentaries. There's a couple of pretty good ones on the Donner Party. But when he was reading the book about the Donner Party, he thought, there's something kind of funny about this. I mean, there's something funny. When you start looking at somebody and realize, like for a meal, somebody you know. I mean, and so he makes this gorgeous film, visually incredibly so. And he chooses for a counterpart. He'd prefer the dance hall girl, for whom he performs in a dream his exquisite dance of the rolls. By the way, he got that from Roscoe Arbuckle. Roscoe Arbuckle set a film about 1918 or so in a bakery and did a dance of the rolls. It was kind of a throwaway, but did it. And Chaplin raised it to this transcendent moment a few years later in the Gold Rush. But the counterpart he actually gets in Keystone, in Gold Rush, is one of his co-workers at Keystone, Max Swain, who would very much like to dine on his little sidekick, but then a storm is always blowing the house off from a cliff, and no one can survive that but a clown in this dream that we call the cinema. And you really get the dream state in the Gold Rush. You get first, it's literally, in the most literal sense, a black and white film, because it's snow, and the snow is everywhere, and the people are especially black and white figures on it. In terms of the movies, Chaplin is clear that he's a dreamer who knows he's dreaming. He's aware that, absolutely sober, he's in a transported state. And I think that's one of the things that the great Chaplin films do. The other great clowns do not invite you to believe that when you're watching a film, you are perhaps not in your proper mind, or at least in surrender to a waking dream state in which, as when asleep, you're not really in charge. There's a suspended reality. I want to speak vaguely. There's this counterpoint of reality and unreality in especially the Gold Rush, because all the other characters are played for real, except Charlie and his counterpart in this film, Max Swain, who is the opposite of Charlie. Charlie's little, Max Swain is huge. Charlie is subtle, Max Swain isn't, and yet he's not playing broadly. He's not playing unbelievably, what I'm looking for. And then the ending, Charlie doesn't get the girl, but he does get the money. And you have the very ending, they're on a boat, they're going back into the world, they're rich, and still Charlie's taken for a tramp. There's that little business at the end, I don't want to ruin it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but still Charlie's taken for a tramp, and we know in the next film he'll be broke again. The one he made after that was The Circus, which is probably his least satisfying feature as Charlie. Maybe because Charlie belongs in a circus. It's the one place where he should belong. Especially the circus of that era. Now we don't have them anymore, unfortunately. Where it was a whole substrata of society. There were hundreds of circuses in Europe and the U.S.A. And so there were thousands of circus people, and that's what they did. They went from town to town, and people celebrated when the circus was in town, but they didn't want the circus to stay. Circus people were not respectable people in the eyes of society. And so setting up, putting Charlie where he belonged, really, where you can see him belonging, instead of in the snows where he definitely doesn't belong, or raising a kid, which in a household which can't go on forever. So the circus, it ends wonderfully. The image of Charlie in the deserted circus ring is one of the iconic Chaplin images for a lot of people, and it gets imitated and in the sense of paid tribute to in the Wim Wenders film Wings of Desire, when the circus leaves town and the trapeze artist, she is looking at them as they leave, and she sits on a suitcase in the middle of what had been the circus ring. It fits within the Wings of Desire story, but it's also an echo, if you like, and a tribute to Chaplin. I've always seen it that way in any case. And then after the circus, he makes City Lights, and we talked about City Lights a little bit last time. The City Lights is crazy, I think, to think of it as a comedy. It's a nightmare all the way. Suicidal millionaires, maniacal boxers, a beautiful blind woman who mistakes Charlie for a rich gentleman, and then Charlie madly takes responsibility for nothing less than her blindness, which really is an interesting nightmare. Charlie takes responsibility. Charlie, this guy with nothing, takes responsibility for making the blind to see. Now, you could go on an enormous tangent about miracle workers, Jesus, etc., who make the blind to see. And I don't want to go there, but it is this completely audacious project, so to speak, that Chaplin makes believable. He wants the blind girl to see. And he saves up the money. There's an operation. He works hard. Again, he kind of creates a household, not that he's living in, but that he's part of. And it builds to and is all about the final moment of seeing. That moment of seeing, when he and the blind girl, blind woman, see each other. And he sees her seeing him. And it comes at the very end, because if ever once it happens, it is the moment you live in from then on. I know that when I saw it, I was unable to express how fascinated and disturbed I was by what for me was a mad and unfunny and totally captivating declaration of the price of sight, of what seeing really is. I don't think it was ever intended as a comedy. I think it's a netherworld picture in which nothing is more beautiful and frightening than seeing. And it puts this, I don't know how he did it, I don't know how he thought of it, but it puts this act of seeing as the climax of the movie and the most intimate thing in life, when you're really, really seeing, not just looking at. And it's been said that was cinematic art, and I would not argue with that, because cinema is all about seeing. But nobody has ever caught it, focused on it, the way Chaplin did. And sound had come in. He issued this movie in 1931. Sound had come in beginning in 1927. And even pictures that were being made silently changed their production, what am I looking for, regime. They put soundtracks on. They put some pictures that had already been made and were about to be issued. They put a music track on it. They put some dialogue scenes in it. And then by 1929, it was all the pictures were sound pictures. And Chaplin said, I won't do it. They can't make me do that. I'm going to issue a silent film in 1931. Remember, it's the Depression. Now, interestingly, because remember I told you Chaplin was a voracious reader. Around 1926 or 7, during the stock market boom, when it was seen that everybody was going to make money forever, he read a book that showed why this wasn't going to be true. And he thought, no. He read it, and he thought about it, and he believed it, and he got all his money out. Chaplin kept his money. He didn't go broke.
Really?
Yep. Greta Garbo, too. She was a very, very canny businesswoman.
Yeah.
I don't know if she read the same book, but she kept her money, too.
Well, she was super smart.
Yeah, really. And so he had the money to do this film. Something like 35 times he filmed the scene where Charlie realizes that the young woman is blind. It didn't satisfy him, and didn't satisfy him, and didn't satisfy him. Something like 35 times. The poor woman must have gone out of her mind.
Yeah.
But, and then it's 1936. Now, of course, sound film has been around for 9 years. And you're in the middle of the Depression. And one of the great things about Chaplin is that he noticed the world he was in. He didn't want to pretend that it wasn't going on, the way most filmmakers were doing at the time. He really noticed the world he was in. He understood what it meant to be poor. He'd been incredibly poor as a child. And he didn't want to make a film that we wanted, to put it in the positive, he wanted to make a film, and of course calling it Modern Times, recognizing that his audience was having a hard time, and that their working conditions sucked, and the factory owners didn't care about them, and make a comedy of it. Because in some dark, terrible way, it's pretty funny that we organize ourselves that way. And it was an incredibly brave thing to do. Make a comedy out of the Depression. And you know, the film starts with this demonstration, and you see it's very cleverly done. If you're of that time, you know you don't have to be told what's going on. They're waving flags, and a truck goes by that has some long piece of lumber or something like that sticking out the back, and there's a red flag on it so that people have perspective, and cars coming up don't hit that pole or whatever it is. And somehow Charlie gets that red flag waving it because everybody else is waving it, but it's a red flag. It means communist. The audience knows that. The cops are looking at him as a radical. Gets thrown in jail. When they do you're seeing what's going on in jail. He's being very direct about it, funny about it, but he's not hiding it. You see the bullies taking food from the weak. You see the gay guy who's kind of a queen. You can people who were hip in the audience could saw what they were seeing, and then he's out in the street, and you've seen at the same time the gay man, which is an odd word meaning just kind of a ragamuffin street girl, not a girl of the streets, a barefoot kid in the street, and you have this strange Paula Goddard being very carefully directed by Chaplin. They married for a time. Very smart woman. And she's being directed to play something like a Mabel Normand character, circa 1912. Same coloring, same visual impression. Mabel Normand's dead by this time. Died in 1930. And they have this impossible, dreamlike, chaste romance. Another impossible household gets set up. And you have Charlie and that amazing scene in the factory. You have very funny stuff in the factory, the whole thing about the food machine, so that people won't even have to take a lunch. You have sound, but not Charlie's sound. You have loudspeakers and all this. And you have the amazing scene of Charlie getting caught in the machine. And everything stops. And again, the keystone companion, Chester Conklin, one of the great physical comedians who could deadpan, just stare at the camera, kind of look back at the camera and just be funny, just the way he looked, what was in his eyes, what he conveyed. He had played with Chaplin many times at the Keystone. In his first film as Charlie, in fact, the first vest Charlie wore was Chester Conklin's vest, Chester Conklin's vest, because Chester Conklin was even smaller than Chaplin. And they do this incredible dance with the generator. And it ends up with Charlie, who does sing a la la nonsense song. They can't get him to talk, but they got him to sing. And he and the gayman, Paula Goddard, walk down the road together in a dream. And it's a wonderful dream. It's very satisfying to see them holding hands and walking down the road together. You don't want them to part. You're thankful that it's not real, because you don't want reality at a moment like this. You just want to see them walking down the road. And it's the last we see of Charlie. Not the last we see of Chaplin, but it's the last we see of Charlie. And yet he kind of comes back in The Great Dictator.
Yeah.
And then The Great Dictator, and people, film critics often ignore the context of these films. That there was the Depression, and Chaplin confronted it. With comedy, but confronted it. Wasn't going to ignore it. Wasn't going to pretend it's not existing. Wasn't going to... Look, I love the screwball comedies. I love the Marx Brothers. It's not that I'm putting anybody else down, but it's Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers musicals, and all that kind of stuff. But they all pretend that nothing's going on out there.
Yeah. There's something in those movies too, in City Lights and Modern Times, where it's not just the working conditions or the poverty. In addition to that, he also has these themes of mechanization and 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 human interaction with these new machines that are in the factories. Like at the start of City Lights and in Modern Times, where he's kind of dancing around these machines and at the same time being kind of abused by them and manhandled by them and just how humans were having to learn to interact with this mechanized environment.
Yes, yes. He was noticing this. He was seeing it. He wasn't taking his life amongst us for granted. He wasn't taking his audience for granted. He was treating his audience like grown-ups who could see a film about this stuff and call it a comedy. God knows there are very funny things in them, but could share this dream life that exposed what was going on outside on the movie screen. And I don't know if The Great Dictator is a successful film. I don't mean if it made money. It did make money. But if it's successful as a film. But here it is, Hitler and Germany are conquering Europe. They are going, to put it mildly, where they were not invited. And he makes this film. First, he recognizes and then cultivates how oddly he and Hitler look alike.
Yeah.
Not from a distance, not from close up, maybe, but from the distance, you fuzz it up a little. They look alike.
What?
A Charlie Chaplin mustache.
What year was Great Dictator?
The Great Dictator was 1940. So you're right in the middle of this.
Right.
The United States isn't in the war yet.
Yeah.
But the Spanish Civil War is over, and the Republic lost, and the war in Europe, most of Europe by 1940 is conquered. The Battle of Britain would climax in the fall of 1940. It actually climaxed on the day that my parents were married. And so during the production of this film, countries are being conquered. What's going on out there is going on in the film as it's being released. And as it's being released, people are pretty sure that England is not going to hold out. England's armies have been defeated in Norway and in Europe, in North Africa, and it looks like there's no way that England could withstand an invasion. When he's making this film, you don't know how the Battle of Britain's going to turn out, because you can't make an amphibious invasion if you don't have air power, if you don't have complete control of the air. Your army will get blown out of the water. And why do you think China hasn't invaded Taiwan yet? How to get an army across the Taiwan Straits is a big problem. But, so it's made when things look darkest. And there's Chaplin playing a Hitler. And he does that marvelous dance with the globe. And he's not doing this after the fact. He's doing it during the fact. He's not looking back over his shoulder. He's looking out into the world. And then you have the Charlie type, the little guy who gets his memory back after being in World War One. It's 20 years later. He gets his memory back. He goes back to his barbershop. You again have Chester Conklin playing the scene with Chaplin in the barbershop. It's funny. The barber's Jewish. All these things start to happen. And then you have Charlie's, there's this mistaken identity between Charlie and I forget the name for the Adolf Hitler character, and so now it's Charlie in the Hitler uniform, and he makes that speech at the end, that impassioned speech, and he was making that speech to the whole world, which was going through what was going on the screen. The whole world, his world, but it was going on in China, and the eastern coast of China was terrible. China, Japan, all of that was going on. The rape of Shanghai, which was really a rape, and sending that message out into the world. When it looked like the worst was going to happen to just about everybody. And when U.S.A. wasn't in that war yet. When you take that film in context, and you see it with an awareness of what the hell is really, put yourself in that time, you have to take your hat off to Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah, I think there's a whole other context to that film too, where he realizes that this is probably going to be his last his last that type of movie. It was the last of that type of movie, and in that movie he kind of puts in all the themes from all those other big movies that he did, like City Lights and Modern Times. You can see
that's a great thing to bring up. That's a great
he's putting all those so besides that whole political part of it, like there's this whole other thing about his career and kind of a summation of he's seeing the world change and the movie industry change irretrievably, and he's been kind of hanging on to this old style, Harold Lloyd, Laurel and Hardy comedy, and this is kind of a sayonara to that, but also kind of he's giving nods to all these different themes in his career.
Absolutely, that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because I had zoomed past it.
Also, I would say that the Hitler character is not specifically Hitler too. He's presenting a political state of mind.
Yes, exactly. And as you said, it is a sayonara to Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah.
That character on film.
Because what's the next one? The next one is Bluebeard.
Well, Monsieur Verdoux.
Yeah, right. Okay.
1947.
Right. Okay.
And the Bluebeard legend.
Right.
Where he plays the murders for comedy, and at this point the McCarthy era is starting up pretty viciously, and he never became an American citizen. Paid taxes here, but never became an American citizen. And he leaves the country to go to Europe, and with the pressure from the McCarthy era, McCarthy forces not just McCarthy, he's not issued a visa to come back.
Wow.
He's told you can't come back. Now, at the end of Monsieur Vertu, which is a scathing satire, really, on murder in cinema.
Really?
On violent cinema.
Huh.
And, you know, he's going to make you laugh at these murders. They're funny.
Right.
And, you know, cinema has been violent since it started. One of the first popular Nickelodeon films was goes on for 30 seconds. It was a firing squad film.
Really?
And a lot of people thought they were seeing the real deal.
Huh.
But he takes you through those murders, and then he's caught. And he gives a speech from, you know, he's going to hang. He gives a speech, get his head cut off, rather, guillotine, I think. Maybe not, maybe it's the hanging. It's been a long time since I've seen it. And he castigates capitalism. He castigates the whole value system of war, where generals have ordered bombs dropped on civilian cities and killing hundreds and killing thousands at a time, and they get medals. And for his little murders, he gets the guillotine. And nobody wanted to hear that. We quote unquote won the war.
Right. I think the Europeans probably sympathized with that.
Yes, I think they did, since they all got bombed. But you know, it's 2 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He knew what he was saying. He knew what he was doing. And the reviewers pounced on that film. It's actually beautifully made.
Yeah, I like that movie.
And if you'll remember, as Chaplin is being led off to the guillotine or the hanging, I really can't remember which at this point. I can see the lighting of the scene. I can't really see this.
Yeah, I can't remember either.
He does this little gesture that is reminiscent of Charlie. A little gesture that echoes Charlie very gently and very slightly. And the film after that we've already talked about, Limelight, where he plays the Death of the Clown. And that's really his last picture. Well, not technically his last picture. That's the last picture where he's really at his full power. He did satire on McCarthyism, A King in New York, which is a movie I like. It's well done. It's not an expression of genius as all his films were from 1921, especially to 1947. Or for 1952 to Limelight. So for 30 years you had this steady stream of just genius. Unique. And The King of New York doesn't pretend to be that, but if you're just looking at it as a thing in itself, and not saying, oh, this isn't a great Chaplin movie, just as a movie in itself, I like it. It's funny. It hits its mark. And it was not released in the U.S.A. until 1972 because it was a little too funny, and the satire was a little too dead on. And then the final film, A Countess in Hong Kong, 1967, with Bueller Wren and fight. It seemed
Really?
like a good idea on paper, but yeah. Brando thought Chaplin was senile, and Chaplin thought Brando couldn't act. They were both wrong, but not on that particular film. And there was no chemistry between Brando and
Yeah,
Sinatra.
yeah.
I don't think she liked him at all. And it's really caught in Chaplin's time. Remember that, as you read in Buckminster Fuller, the great passenger liners. One of the reasons that the Titanic was such a shock to everybody is that the passenger liners were the height of what technology had accomplished up to that time. In their propulsion system, escalators were invented for the passenger liners. Air conditioning invented for the passenger liners. All kinds of innovations in electrical, etc., and even in kinds of metals. These were amazing ships. And making the crossing, as they'd say, was an adventure. And you see it in a bunch of movies in the 30s and 40s. And by the 1960s, there were only a couple left. And even in the 1960s, flying was a special thing. Not everybody's hopped on a plane like they did today. The romance of the passenger liner was not a part of life anymore. And if you just look at it as a nice comedy, it'd be a nice comedy if it had two people who liked each other, who had some real chemistry. And if you want a summation of a career, you'd wish for something different. But how much does a man have to prove?
Yeah.
In the last time I see Charlie as Charlie is that echo in Monsieur Verdot at the end.
Yeah.
And the last time I see Chaplin as Chaplin is Calvero in Limelight. And it ends with the death of the clown. But the death of the clown is going on while the dancer is reborn. It really ends with the dance. And that was Chaplin's signature, so to speak. Also, that stunt he did, he was in his 60s, off the stage and into the drum. That was a dangerous stunt.
Yeah.
And it'd be dangerous if he was in his 20s. And let's see, he was born, blah, 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 blah. He was in his early 60s. And that's how he went out, as Charlie Chaplin. And I don't think, let's put it this way, there hasn't been, again, somebody who could perform the film, write the music for the film, direct the film, edit the film. There hasn't been that kind of auteur. I think the auteur theory is kind of overdone, but not in Chaplin's case.
Well, okay.
Okay.
That was a good episode and a good summation of Charlie Chaplin in these two episodes. So, all right.
Well, it's been fun. It's fun talking about Chaplin.
Yep.